Welcome to the Know It's Some podcast, bringing you the widest variety of conversational interviews for a well-rounded perspective on life. Because while it's true, nobody likes a know-it-all, it's also good to know it's some. Here's your host, Steve Platt.
That's right. I'm Steve Platt, and you're listening to the Know It's Some podcast, an affiliate of the Big Three Roll-Up Network. I just want to welcome back all of our weekly listeners. Sincerely, thank you for supporting the show. If you haven't done so already, you're going to want to hit that follow or subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We're bringing you an interview every week with interesting guests, and this week is no exception. We were able to sit down with Lauren Pastrana, the co-news anchor of CBS 4 Miami. She's on weeknights at 5, 6, 7, and 11 p.m. doing the newscast there in the Miami area on CBS 4. She's an Emmy-nominated multimedia journalist with experience in television, radio, and web-based news reporting. And she took the time to speak with us a little bit about her career as a news journalist and a little bit about the events that are currently affecting the Miami community, like the tragic Surfside condo collapse. We also spoke a little bit about the protests erupting across Cuba. And I got to say, she brings a real humanity to news reporting that is refreshing. She pulled back the curtain a little bit about what it's like to present the news in today's environment. And I really enjoyed our conversation. I know you guys are going to enjoy this interview. Please welcome to the show my friend, Lauren Pastrana. Lauren, welcome to the Know It Some podcast. I appreciate you spending some time with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And for the listeners who are unfamiliar, so you're the weekday evening news anchor over there at CBS 4 in Miami. And from what I know about you, this is a dream job of yours that you've kind of been looking forward to most of your life. I guess I'd like to start with asking you, who or what inspired you to want to pursue journalism in the first place?
I don't know if there's a who in particular that inspired me. There's definitely a lot of journalists that I looked up to when I was younger, mostly at the local level. And it's interesting now to have been able to reach where I am in my career and to say that I actually get to work with a lot of the people that I watched growing up. I watched Elliot Rodriguez, who's my co-anchor now. I watched Rick Sanchez, who no longer works on local TV, but I watched him. Lori Jennings, who recently left the business. Dwight Lauderdale. So many people who I watched and admired growing up here at the local level. To say that I was able to work in this industry while as one of their contemporaries, at the same time as them, was truly just mind blowing to me. And yeah, I started off as a reporter. I started off in radio, doing traffic reporting. And by reporting, I mean, I was just looking up accidents on the computer and inputting it to a system that all the other traffic reporters who would go on air actually could read. So I would kind of just aggregate everything, but I wasn't actually on the radio talking. So that's how I started, just being like a data collection service. But I grew from there. But as far as what made me want to pursue this career, I loved writing. I loved storytelling, and I loved the idea of getting to share just average Joe, quote unquote, stories, because I'm a firm believer that everyone has a story. I can go to a phone book right now, pick someone. Do we even have those anymore? I don't know. But if I could find a phone book as a Yellow Pages or whatever, I could, find someone's name, call them up. And if they'd be willing to talk to me, I think any reporter could go and talk to them and actually get a story, because everybody has one. And that's kind of what ties us all together in our shared humanity. So I love being able to give a voice to those stories for people. Granted, we can't tell everyone's story because we don't have unlimited time on TV, but it's really a passion of mine to be able to share them with as many people as possible. Unfortunately, so much of what we do broadcast, because of time constraints and just the need to report what's happening in our community, it's sad. There's hard news, and we have to do it. It doesn't get any easier to report on tragedies. And I know people are saying, oh, I don't watch the news because it's so depressing. It's like, well, it's life. These are things that are happening every day around us. But I try to find the moments of of brightness and lightness and share people's stories. I used to have a segment called South Florida Survivors, and that was
Hmm.
really when I felt like I had made it, because I was like, I finally get to do the stories of people who just average people who can inspire others just by, overcoming some obstacle. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, it doesn't have to be an illness or some tragedy, but just,
Right.
the challenges that life threw their way, they were able to overcome and then give back to the community in some way. And from what I remember of doing those segments, I got a lot of great feedback because it inspired other people to be like, "Oh, hey, yeah, like this showed me that I can do my little part and it'll
Right.
make a difference." So that's kind of in a nutshell why I got into this job and why I love it altogether.
Well, see, those stories are uplifting, and I do feel like there is that reputation of, well, everything on the news is tragic or sad, but there are uplifting
Mhm.
stories here and there, and you have to look for those silver linings.
Mhm.
But you're right. I mean, there are some heartbreaking stories in the news right now, particularly
Yeah.
affecting the Miami community that's part of your market. Things like the Surfside condo collapse or the
Yeah.
protests in Cuba, where the Cuban people are taken to the streets. They're tired of starvation and oppression. What's it like covering tragic stories when they hit close to home like that? Because I know with Surfside, it's particularly hard as a parent. I have a 1-year-old daughter, seeing the photos of the children lost in that collapse. And
Yeah.
as a fellow Cuban American, I know that the Patria y Vida movement must be also personal for you as it is for me. When it hits close to home and it's tragic like that, what's it like to cover those kinds of stories?
Everything is personal. I mean, even if it doesn't directly impact me in the sense that it didn't happen to me, this is still my community. These are my neighbors. These are friends, friends of friends, whatever. We're all interconnected in some way. So when something like Surfside happens, it just, it really shakes you to your core and it really makes you, at least for me, it made me take a step back and think of what I'm doing, while it may seem small and while some people may have their thoughts about the media, it is important in its own way. It helped, I think, in those early days and hours really after it happened, everyone turned into the news because they wanted to know what was going on. And it
Hmm.
was just one of those things where I felt like I was doing a service. So that helped me to kind of keep focused and try to put aside the emotion of that moment. Um, but we're all human, so it
Right.
impacts us all greatly. And usually when we cover tragedies, um, it gets easier as the
Hmm.
days go on because like the tragedy is over and now it's time to,
Cope.
to heal and cope and all that. But in this case with Surfside, it just kept getting worse every day because
I
you
know.
knew that number was going to go up, and we're still waiting as of right now as we're recording this. I believe it's 22 potentially unaccounted for still, and we're
Mhm.
19 days past this happening. So, and like you said, every time you see one of the, like, the police release the names of the victims and you see a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old or two sisters buried in the same coffin, it's just it's it's hard not to get emotional on air to, keep it together. But I do think this is one of those situations where it's okay to show that humanity that we all are,
Yeah.
not to sound trite or, silly, but like we're all in this together. We truly are. We feel for these people who were impacted because it's not just like this one building and it's not
Mhm.
just Surfside because the people who were there didn't just live in Surfside. Some of them were just visiting. Some of them were from
Yep.
other parts of the world and they had ties to other, cities in South Florida and family members and things like that. So we as journalists we're told like don't make yourself part of the story, and I really 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 try not to. I'm very strict on myself, especially, and I'll get into it a little bit more with especially the whole Cuba thing.
Yeah.
But I think that at times you have to show that you're a human being and that this impacts you too. Otherwise, we're just a bunch of robots, and why not just have like holograms doing the news,
No,
Which,
certainly.
gosh, I don't doubt that if one day it might happen, but that's what sets us apart. Why it's important to have a human being delivering your news. And then, like you mentioned, the Cuba story and why it's personal. I've also tried in these last couple of days as I've watched the protests unfold. I've shared the news as it's happening, but I've tried very hard not to make it about myself and
Hmm.
my family, because I know right now the story is about the people who are still on that island right now, and that they're starving and hurting and need help. So it doesn't
Hmm.
add much value to share, oh, my grandparents left 60 years ago. I mean,
Hmm.
it's still part of my story and it's why this means a lot to me, but I try to be very sensitive to the fact that this is not about me. This is about them.
Certainly.
And I think for the most part, a lot of journalists do the same. And if they want to share their own personal story, that's absolutely okay too. Everyone has a different way of doing things and different styles. But in
Absolutely.
this particular case, I've just, decided to be like, this is not my time to discuss how this is making me feel, because there are people who are in this right now. So let's get out the
Absolutely.
word about what's happening to them.
And that's a really hard thing to do, I think, because so many of us who are Cuban American have our own stories that are deeply personal to us. And
Hmm.
I think that's why the Miami exile community, if you look at what's going on A Street, the support is there for the Cuban people that are
Yeah.
suffering, because we've all suffered in our own ways. But you're right that this is not the time to make it about us or our families. This is the time to support these people who are right now just trying to have some basic things like food and medicine.
Yeah.
Um,
And I get people who aren't journalists making it like sharing their stories, and I get that. And it's not so much that, but with the way that reporters and journalists and the media, and if you'd see me, you'd see me doing like air quotes, because yes, we are part of the media, but I mean, over the years the media has been vilified in a
yes,
way, and as if we are just pushing out our own opinions and propaganda and things like that. So
right.
look, here I am getting political when I said I wasn't
No,
going
well,
to. but
no, but
but
you're
basically,
right.
yeah.
But you haven't really shown any bias in your reporting. When I watch you, you really are the ultimate professional in terms of bringing people the information that they need, right? And then they can formulate the opinion. But you're not
Yes.
some sort of and this is not to disparage. I have some friends in cable news, so I'm not trying to disparage, but I'm just saying these 24-hour news cycles, they demand sometimes a lot of commentary and opinion
Yeah.
and rehashing, right? But what you do, you bring the news to people every evening, 5, 6, 7, and 11, right?
Yep.
Um, and in that newscast, you are really bringing the news. It's not the Lauren Pastrana show, right?
Exactly. And that's kind of what I try and get across. When I post like on social media and things like that, yeah, obviously it's going to be more of me because it's my pages and things like that. But when I
Hmm.
share news stories, I try very like deliberately to not add in any bit of Lauren Pastrana, to just be like, this is what's going on. And I
Right.
mean, take it or leave it, it's the facts. So, and obviously everyone is going to interpret, facts in different ways. But in this particular, moment in our history with what's happening in Cuba and what's happening still on the ground in Surfside, and just, in general, everything that's happening around us every day, I still choose to leave my opinions out of it publicly when I can.
Right. Well, you do a great job of that. You mentioned earlier, that Surfside doesn't just affect the Miami community, and it's true. But
Hmm.
because Miami is such a large metropolitan market, I know it's a market that you and I grew up in. The local news there is often national or international news.
That's right. It
And there is an interconnectedness to it. So I mean, what does it mean to you? What does it feel like to cover some of the biggest events of our time, because this is not some rural area of Wyoming that you're covering.
Yeah, there is a thing that we say in the newsroom after any big breaking story happens anywhere else. It says, wait for the Miami connection, because
Hmm.
there usually is one. So after the president of Haiti was assassinated last week, we said there's going to be a connection, because obviously we do have a Haitian American community here in
A
South
large one.
Florida. So we thought there would be something.
Hmm.
Lo and behold, not only was it that the first lady was brought here to Jackson Memorial Hospital to be treated, but now we're finding out that there were arrests made here in South Florida and
Yes.
in the rest of the state, as being the people behind this
Yep.
assassination. So
Hmm.
so there's that connection. And then obviously with the Cuba and what's happening there's a huge connection, because so many people here still have family there. And it's just everything comes back, it seems, it comes back to South Florida or Florida in general, because of the the makeup of our community. But the makeup
Certainly.
of our community is what makes it the best. Like, I
It makes
love
it
living
makes
here,
it
and it makes
unique.
it so special. Exactly. It really does. It
Yeah,
really does.
there's so much about Miami that's unique. I still miss, I live in Sarasota, Florida. I still miss, the ventanitas, having a little window to grab some croquetas and café con leche
Oh
or
yeah.
whatever. It's
Those
special
are very
too.
busy today, I'm sure, with everybody talking outside
Certainly,
of, Versailles
certainly.
and Sergio's and La Carreta. I'm sure yeah, it's like a whole different thing that you don't see in other parts of the country. It's truly a special place.
Certainly. When you're covering big stories, whether they be tragic events like Surfside or the suffering in Cuba, or any big story really, is there a different feel or atmosphere in the newsroom when things pick up like that, or is it kind of an even keel feel all the time?
Hmm. This I go back to Surfside because obviously it's one of the most recent things that we had happen that was a huge, I hate to call it a story, but a huge
Hmm.
breaking news event
It is.
in our community. And we have had for the last year and a half, because of COVID, like so many other people and so many other businesses, most of our staff has still been working from home.
Mm.
So when
Wow.
Surfside happened, um, on the 24th of June. I can't believe it's already been like almost that much time.
Yeah.
But I walked into the newsroom. Well, I came in early. So I normally come into work at 2:30 in the afternoon. But that day, the second I woke up at 6:45 and I saw what happened, I called and they said, come in as early as you can. Can you be here by 8? And I said, well, I got to take my kids to school. Like, I got to take my son to camp and I got to drop off my daughter. But yes, I'll be there as soon as I can. So somehow I managed to get everybody handled with the kids, and I was at work by 8:30 and I was on TV
Wow.
by 9 a.m. and then I was on air straight until almost midnight. I didn't finish like
Incredible.
until, the night was over. But when I came out for one little break, we actually did have a break at 6:30 because the evening news did do their newscast. So I had a break, and when I came out to the newsroom and I saw all the people, I was like, "Oh my gosh, we have like a staff full of people again in here because everybody came in."
Hmm.
So as far as like the different feeling in the newsroom during events like that, this definitely, made that stand out because we had been so used to having just a few people in the building and then everyone else working from home. Even on election night, which I thought would be one of those nights where we'd have a ton of people in the building,
Hmm.
we didn't. We only had, a select few. Granted, this was back in November, so COVID was still much, the vaccines weren't out yet. It was a different story. So a lot of people were not coming in at all. But this was the most I'd seen as far as people in the building. And yeah, there's definitely a um a different buzz, a different vibe. It's hard to explain when breaking news hits, and this is just breaking news in general, whether it's a chase or something else, or when Castro died. I
Hmm.
came into work at 2 in the morning that day, I believe it was. It was the Friday after Thanksgiving.
I remember it. I
And
was in Miami.
so,
Hmm.
yeah, so when I came in, I mean, again, it was one of those things, no one was in the building and they're just like, get on TV as fast as you can. And we did. And but when I came out, when we went off the air at, I don't know, 9 something the next morning, it was like a full newsroom full of people and everyone was just kind of buzzing and what do we do? And it's incredible to see the teamwork that comes together and everyone kind of knows their role and what they need to be doing. And it's an organized chaos in a way because I mean we're getting all kinds of information from all different sources and it's all coming fast and we're needing to verify and make sure that everything is right. And plus we can't, we're not just, tweeting this and we're not just,
Right.
writing it for a website. We have to have, pictures to match. We need video, we need interviews with people, we need all sorts of things, phone interviews, whatever we can get.
Hmm.
So there's definitely a feeling of, camaraderie and teamwork when things like this happen, when any kind of breaking news happens. So it's incredible to see and it's why I love this job. I consider myself an introvert big time, which people are like, "Really? But you're on TV." I'm like, "Yeah, totally." Like I like my alone time and to recharge, I need to be by myself, but I love that this job is about the team and not just one person. So,
Right.
and I can say that I have an incredible team that I get to work with. So
No, I mean, I'm,
I
I'm
love
sure
it.
it's a family, and
Yeah.
Elliot
Oh, yeah.
Rodriguez is a legend. So, it's pretty great to be able to work alongside him. I'm sure. Uh,
Yes, he's great.
now you didn't just get handed this role. You worked very hard, and had a long journey to get to where you're the weekday anchor, weekday evening news anchor there at CBS4. If there are any young aspiring journalists listening, is there anything that maybe you would have done differently, knowing what you know now? Any experience maybe learned the hard way that isn't taught at journalism schools, that maybe you could pass on to younger journalists that are coming up in the ranks?
One thing that I would do differently is not so much of, actual work put in, but as far as mentally do differently would be to acknowledge from the beginning that everyone's path is going to be different. I would
Okay.
obsess over reading news anchors, like main evening news anchors bios, and be like, okay, what did they do? And how can I do exactly that to copy it and, get there? And I must follow their path. These are the steps to success. And
Right.
really,
Right.
everyone's path is so different. When I went to UF, one of my first TV professor, he said we were in a class of like 300 people. It was one of those like 2100 courses where everyone's just starting out in the major, and he says, "Who here wants to be an anchor?" And a lot of the room raises their hands because most of us at the time
Mhm.
did. And then he says, "Well, your best bet is to just jump off the front of a boat because that's the only anchor you'll ever be." Like,
Wow.
because I mean, but he was telling the truth. There's only
Yeah.
so many anchor jobs out
Right.
there. It's the truth. It's just the way that it is.
It's
So
hard to hear it that way.
yeah. So, but I was like, I will prove him wrong. I will do this. And then that's when I became like, okay, so what did everyone else do? And how did they become an anchor? And of course, at that time, which wasn't even that long ago, this was, 2006, I think, when he gave this speech. Um, it was, again, not that long ago, at least to me, it feels like it was yesterday that I was in
Mhm.
college. But I would see everyone say, okay, well, you have to start in a really small market and then you have to work your way up and you probably have to work in a bunch of different cities in the middle of nowhere and get paid nothing and, suffer and all these things.
The
And I was
formula.
willing.
Yeah.
Yes, I was willing. I was like, let's go. Let's move to Montana. Sign me up. Like, I'll do whatever it takes. But I learned along the way that, oh, it doesn't have to be that way. Not everyone is going to be that way. So
Mhm.
for me, when I graduated after, like thanks to my internships and just connections I had made along the way while I was in college, I was able to graduate and get a job immediately in Miami in
Right.
radio. That was probably not what a lot of people wanted to do because they wanted to be on TV,
Of
and
course.
that to them was more important. And I get it. Eventually that was my goal too. But I saw the value in, okay, learning how to just focus on interview quality and focus on my writing and my delivery without worrying about is my hair okay and what am I wearing and all that silliness that unfortunately comes along with being on TV.
Right.
So I got a lot of good experience working in radio, and because I chose radio, I was able to work in Miami right out of the gate. Very few people, not zero people, but very few get to just graduate and go straight onto TV in Miami. Some people have done it. There's a good amount of people who are on air in Miami now who have done it.
Mhm.
But that wasn't for me. I sent out my resume tape in Miami right when I graduated, and I'm sure a lot of news directors laughed at it and probably said, this girl is terrible. But luckily, I was able to get radio job. But after working in radio for 2 years, and this is news radio, I wasn't doing like I wasn't a DJ or anything like that. That is not my expertise. It
Mm.
was just news. I applied again for jobs in TV, but I was like, okay, I want to stay in Florida. That's my goal. I'll go anywhere in Florida because I was married already at the time.
Okay.
And I was like, I want to stay in Florida, but my husband has to stay here in Miami because any journalism job is not going to pay a lot of money. So he needs to stay here and make money while I go and pursue this dream of mine. So luckily, I was able to send out tapes all over and I got quite a few calls back. I was surprised considering I'd been working in radio for so long. So my actual my resume tape was my college stuff. So it was old at that point, but it's all I had. And I got some opportunities for interviews in Fort Myers. And eventually, the offer that I got first was as a freelancer at Wink, which is the
Mhm.
CBS affiliate in Fort Myers. And they said, listen, we don't have anything full time right now. And you've kind of been out of TV for a while. So we were thinking maybe you can come on the weekends and we'll pay you a per diem rate so you can do some stories. and we'll regroup after you do that for a while and see if there's anything for you that we can give you full time. And I was like,
Mm.
let's do it. So I would work at the radio station, and then I would drive across the alley on Friday nights. I would stay at a really cheap hotel, which the station didn't pay for. I was paying for it out of pocket, so making even less money. And I would report Saturday and Sunday. And I was willing to do that for the long haul. I was like, I'll do whatever it takes. I don't care. And after the second Saturday, so I did Saturday, Sunday, then I went back home. They said, "Oh, great job. We love it. We'll see you next week." I came back on that second, the next weekend. And after that Saturday, I got a call and they're like, "We're going to offer you a full-time job." I was like,
Wow.
"What?" Like, oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Incredible.
So yeah, so I packed up my half of my stuff and moved over to Fort Myers, and I worked there for almost 2 years, and I loved it. I really feel like I learned so much, and um there's something to be said about working in smaller markets. Fort Myers is
Hmm.
not tiny by any stretch of the imagination. It's not like a little town. I mean, there's a good amount of people who live there, and
Right.
the market covers, it's Collier County, Lee County, Charlotte County, Henry.
Hmm.
Like, there's a big viewing area, and I learned that, what? It's so much better to make mistakes where fewer people can see you. It's not to say I was making egregious mistakes, but silly things where, you get tongue tied or you mess up, and it's like,
I
oh,
wanted
okay, it's fine.
I wanted to ask
Like,
about that because we watch the newscast over here to keep that's the great thing about being able to stream TV is you could do that. We
yeah.
watch the newscast from back in Miami to keep up with things because we still have Natalie's parents there and some family there.
Hmm.
And it seems like everything comes off perfect, right? And you might not feel that way, but your newscasts come out flawless. And I'm wondering, have you had any like blooper reel moments, like any Ron
Oh,
Burgundy things happen?
oh my God. Well, there was one time, speaking of Ron Burgundy, that, like, everything went to garbage, and like it was the end of the show, and it was just like, where are we going? What's happening? Are we running out of time? Blah blah blah. And I said, to say goodbye, I said, "Thanks for stopping by." Just like Veronica Corningstone. And I was like,
That's
oh my
phenomenal.
God, I can't believe this just came out of my mouth. Like,
That's
what?
hilarious.
Why would I say such a thing? So yeah, and I mean, we've obviously had our moments where we read something off the teleprompter that is wrong, and we should have caught it, because we all read, I mean, we read our scripts beforehand. There's this
Right.
misconception that we're just, talking heads who read whatever's put in front of us. No,
Mhm.
we all go over our scripts, we rewrite our scripts. I change a lot of stuff just to make it sound more like something I would actually say in a
Mhm.
conversation. I don't
Okay.
change what's being said. I mean, I keep the
The core of the
facts the
message.
same,
Yeah.
but I change it, and like, we try and be as conversational as possible. So I try and think of it, how would I tell my mom this story?
Right.
That's how I try and break it down to that, form of dialogue, so that way it's not sounding so robotic and so, oh, prim and proper news lady. Um, and so, yeah, we review, but sometimes we miss things, or sometimes we change something, and then a producer jumps in because they said, "Oh, I forgot to put something," and then they change it back. And before you know it, you get on air and you're caught off guard, and a word you didn't know pops up into the prompter, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, now." And you see it coming, because as the prompter's rolling, I try and keep my eyes like a couple lines ahead, even though I'm
Mhm.
reading. It's weird. It's something I've just been able to do over time. It's a weird skill I've obtained. I can kind of look ahead to what's coming up in the prompter while I'm still reading what I'm actually saying. And I'll see something like, oh my gosh, there's a word I don't know how to pronounce. Oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do? And in those moments, I'm just making split second decisions of like how to avoid saying that word, or how to pronounce it so I sound like I know what I'm talking about, even though I don't. Like,
You know,
sometimes that just happens.
more than half the time we don't notice. I promise you. It's funny because you might have it in your head like, oh, I think I said that wrong, and the viewing audience does not catch it at all.
Yeah, they have no idea. Exactly. As long as you say it authoritatively, for the most part, they're just like, "Oh, okay, cool." And they just go by. I mean, I've had some people, I mean, this is rare. I've probably had like two instances in my life where a viewer has emailed me to be like, "You're an idiot for saying this wrong. How dare you?"
You're
There was
always gonna have those.
yes, there was a street in Fort Myers that was spelled Ortiz. So
Hmm.
to me, that's Ortiz. I mean, that's how
Yep.
we grew up. It's Ortiz. Apparently in Fort Myers, it's Ortez.
Yeah.
And I got like reamed by a viewer for like, I'm just some dumb young girl who they brought in from who
Oh,
knows
yeah.
where to like come and ruin their fine city with my horrible pronunciation. I'm like,
Uh,
but this pronunciation makes no sense. But you just let those nasty comments roll off, and we get lots of them. So I try not to dwell. So that would be another big piece of advice for aspiring journalists: develop a thick skin,
oh yeah.
and not to the point where that nothing can sway you, because sometimes there's criticism that's warranted, maybe not delivered in the best way, but yeah, sometimes they have a point. But
Sure.
know that most of
Some
the
people are
time it's
just
not.
trolling.
Yeah, some people are just trolling, and for the most part it says more about the person who is saying these things to you than it does
Yeah.
about you. So
Yeah, they're
just try
definitely going
and
through something where they get off on
exactly.
sending those kinds of
If
messages.
they bothered with finding my email address, which on our website, it's very hard to do because like the personality pages are buried in our site and it's not user friendly at all. So I'm like, okay, they went through the mission of tracking me down to
Oh
write
yeah.
this, monologue to me to say something. It's like that says more about them and what's going on in their life than about mine. So I just kindly thank them for watching, because clearly if they're picking me apart, they're at least watching. And then I move on because sometimes it's just not worth the energy.
That's part of the vilification we were talking
Yeah.
about earlier. I'll tell
Yeah.
you, we both Natalie and I, we're proud to call you a friend and to watch you on the news every night. And I think Miami as a market, and CBS4 in particular, they're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Obviously, people can catch you at 5, 6, and 7 p.m., and then again at 11.
Yep.
Catch the newscast. But because it's 2021, where can people find you on social media?
So on Twitter, I'm at Lauren Pastrana, just like that. But on Instagram, because someone already took Lauren Pastrana, I'm at Lauren G Pastrana on Instagram. And I
Okay.
just recently joined TikTok against my
Yep.
will
You
and
got the
my better
dances.
judgment, but I did it. I've only posted one thing so far, and that is also at Lauren G Pastrana. And then I'm on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Lauren Pastrana News. So I try and change up what I post on each thing, so I'm not just,
Mhm.
doing the same thing across all four platforms. Uh, Instagram is obviously a little bit more personal. Twitter, that's where we can share more direct links to stories and the news as it's happening. I'm not actively Instagram posting every little bit of information like we do with Twitter that you could
Mhm.
just send it off really quickly. And then, yeah, Facebook, it's mostly videos and things like that. So I try to change it up, but it is a work in progress because social media is like a whole other job in itself. It's so
It is,
crazy
especially
that,
TikTok.
yeah.
You
Oh,
can get real
gosh.
creative there. Wait,
I'm so lost on TikTok. It's
yeah.
crazy.
Well, we also look up to you as a parent, and I'll tell you, I can't wait till your kids. They're starting to get older now. They're gonna eventually be super embarrassed by what you post on TikTok. I'm sure.
Oh my gosh. Well, my son who is 6, he wanted TikTok. I'm like, "How do you even know about TikTok? Like, where did this come from?" So I
Oh no.
created a TikTok for him, but
Oh
I
boy.
locked it down and he
Yeah.
can't have any followers. So it's literally just for him to make his own videos of himself and share them with no one. And like he makes like creative funny ones with all these different filters and things
Oh.
like that. And I'm like, "You need to teach me how to do this, kid." Because he's already figured out like, okay, this is how you start a new TikTok and this is how you put, but again, it's not for anyone to see. And actually once he posts them, I go in and delete them because I have the
Mhm.
app on my phone. So he posts them from his iPad and I get little notifications and I'm like, delete, delete, delete. But yeah, and I try, it's funny with the whole your kids are going to be embarrassed one day. I really try to make it a point not to post too much. I mean, I post about them obviously because they're my kids and I adore them. But sometimes I see some parents who maybe post stuff that I'm like, "Oh my gosh, if their kids ever see these things, like it's embarrassing for the kid, like down the road." So I try to be cognizant of that. And then you have these celebrities who don't show their kids' faces at all, and like they hide it. I'm like, obviously I'm not that level of celebrity, which I don't think I am one at all, but I'm like, should I be not showing my kids faces? Like, are there really people out there? And so there's all these crazy things I
You
think
never
of
know.
every time I go to post something. I'm pretty strict about showing or not showing rather where my son goes to school, I always, put a little emoji or something over his uniform shirt so nobody can see it. Because you're right, you never know, and especially with what we cover in the news. I mean, I've seen the gamut of human atrocities,
Yes.
unfortunately. So
Mhm.
I try to be very careful. So that also goes for not embarrassing them too much, and not embarrassing myself, because sometimes I don't want to look like a fool either. So I'm like,
With TikTok,
maybe I won't
it's
post that
bound
video.
it's bound to happen on there.
Well,
I thank you so much, Lauren Pastrana. You mentioned Elliot Rodriguez and Lori Jennings. You're gonna go down in history along all of them, Jackie Nesbro, all the Miami legends.
wow,
And you're
thank
just
you.
getting started. So definitely excited to have this episode drop tomorrow, and appreciate your time.
Likewise, thank you so much.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Know It Some podcast. My thanks again to our guest this week, Lauren Pastrana. I know that with everything going on right now in the Miami community, that your time is both limited and valuable, and it means a lot that you spent some of it with us here on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I know that our listeners will as well. So once again, thank you. You are welcome back on the show anytime. Folks, if you haven't done so already, please make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button on your preferred podcast listening platform. And if you could, head on over to Apple or iTunes and give us a 5-star ranking, leave a review, because it really is the very best way to support the show and help us book interesting guests week in and week out. Another good way to support the show would be to follow us on social media. We are on all social media platforms at Know It Some Pod. That's Know It Some Pod on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you name it. We're there at Know It Some Pod. And you could also submit your feedback by sending us a direct message on any of those platforms or sending us an email, knowitsomepod@gmail.com. Folks, I really appreciate all the support. The feedback has been phenomenal, and I'm excited to bring you a new episode each and every week. Check on Tuesday mornings, and you will find a new episode of the Know It Some podcast. I will see you next week.